Hello, this is Farouk, and in this video I will demonstrate how to create an Angular application using NX. When starting out fresh with NX, you will first need to create an NX workspace. An NX workspace sets up the tooling that your Angular applications will use. After the workspace is created, you can add Angular applications to that workspace. A workspace will typically have multiple applications, and it will become your mono repo. Okay, let's create our first Angular application using NX. I'm going to do this in Visual Studio Code. So open up Visual Studio Code and open up a terminal window. The first step is creating an NX workspace. And that's straightforward enough. You use the create NX workspace command, and then you give it a workspace name. I'm just going to use my organization name. Press enter and it will go through the machinations of setting up the workspace. And it will ask you a few questions about the workspace configuration. All right, it says, what do you want to create in the new workspace? We're just going to choose empty, and we're going to choose the Angular CLI. All right, so it's going to go through some more machinations, download a bunch of packages. And you can see it's creating several files. And they're all going to be organized under the workspace name that you gave in the create workspace command. And we're done. The workspace has been created. I've opened the workspace folder in Visual Studio Code, and I want to just show you some of the highlights of the workspace. So first, let's go to package.json, and you can see there are a bunch of npm scripts that have been set up for you. Familiar ones like start, which does an ng-serve. Then you also have test, which is an ng-test. Then you have all the affected colon ones, which, as I mentioned in the previous video, allow you to limit running of tests, for example, in the case of affected tests, to only those tests that are affected by your code changes. And you also have a command like dep graph, which shows you the dependency graph. So a lot of useful commands have been set up for you. And then you can see under dep dependencies, you have your TypeScript, prettier, lint, even tsnode, and .env for configuration already set up for you. So if you look at the folder structure, you'll see an apps folder. The apps folder is where your Angular applications will go. And then the libs folder is intended for shared code. Going back to package.json, you may notice that the only Angular thing that we have installed is a dev dependency, Angular CLI. When you create an Angular application, there usually is more stuff relating to Angular, but we don't see that. Well, that's because we need to tell NX to create an Angular application for us. So let's do that. Now we can use the NX CLI to create an Angular application in our workspace, but I'd rather use this handy Visual Studio Code extension. So if you click our extensions button in code and then type in NX, you'll see the NX console, and you should install that. It provides a really nice GUI for managing workspaces and applications, so you don't have to type or memorize CLI commands. I already have it installed, and so I see this NX console icon here. Click that. And to add an Angular application to the workspace, I will click this add button here, and then type in nwrl/Angular. And this will set up the tooling for Angular applications in our workspace. Now you only have to do this one time. because we had a fresh workspace with nothing in it, we had to do this. It's going to ask us which unit test runner would we like to use for the app. We can just say Jest, but it's nice. It gives you a choice now between Jest and Karma. End-to-end test runner, you can use Protractor or Cypress. So we'll just use Cypress. And again, it's going through the machinations of setting up the Angular tooling. And this might take a while because there are several packages that it has to install, including Cypress, which takes a while. So I'm just going to pause this video until the installation is complete. Okay, so that command completed. And let's see, we have a few changes in our workspace. So let's just take a look at what the package.json changes were. And as we can see, it added a bunch of Angular dependencies. And then we also see there's a jest.config.js, which is a configuration file for your Jest tests. So you can see basically it sets up the regular expression for the files, the test files that we'll look at. So all this stuff is done for you, which is, again, really big time saver. And it makes some updates to angular.json. So now we're at a point where we can actually create the Angular application itself, now that we have all the tooling set up. We're going to create an Angular application called to-dos. To create that, we click on our NX console icon, and then click Generate, and then choose the @narwhal/Angular. Which will create an Angular application for us. And this will bring up this UI where we fill in the details. So the name is to-dos, the style, I'm going to use SCSS. The directory you can leave blank, backend project, that's fine. The end-to-end test runner, we're going to use Cypress, TSLint for the linter. Okay. And everything else you can just, and unit test runner Jest. Everything else you can leave up to default for now. And as you can see, the terminal window does a dry run command, which is pretty handy because you can see what files it'll create, and you can make sure it's creating in the proper location. So in this case, when we actually run the command, it's going to create a folder under our apps, as I mentioned before, called to-dos. That's the name of your application. So the idea is if you create another application called Calendar, it'll go under the apps folder as well, apps calendar. And so these will be independent applications, and over time, your list of applications will grow, and that is the monorepo idea. So this looks good. Let's click Run. Oh, and it asks us, would you like to configure routing? We'll just say yes, sure. All right, and that's done pretty quick. Let's close the terminal, and we'll close our console window. Running that command resulted in quite a few changes to our workspace, so let's look at some of them. First, you have new stuff under the apps folder. Under apps, you have the name of the application, to-dos, that we created. And if we look in there, we can see that there's an SRC file and then another app file. So app folder. So what's in there? Well, it's your familiar Angular application files. You have your app component, your app module, the environments folder, and then index.html, and a bunch of JSON files relating to configuration. So at this point, it looks like a familiar Angular application. It's just organized in a standard way. You also have the end-to-end. So for every application that you create, you're going to have a application name -e2e, which contains the end-to-end tests. It's also instructive to see what changes are made to this angular.json file. So I'm going to open this up in the diff view so we can see what was added. We can see a huge JSON section was added. So the Angular workspace angular.json file provides workspace-wide and project-specific configuration defaults for build and development tools provided by the Angular CLI. So we can see that we, or NX, created a project called to-dos, which contains the application-specific configuration. So every application you add to this workspace, NX will create a project, a new object under projects. So this is how you can have multiple projects in a singular NX workspace. And incidentally, when you create shared libraries, or by default, it will create a new project for that library as well. And it uses this information to do the dependency graphs and also to determine, in the case of the affected commands, what should run. Right, let's run the to-dos application and see what we got. So I'm just going to do this again in the Visual Studio Code GUI by clicking on npm scripts and then running the start command. And it's going to compile, and then you'll see that it listens on port 4200, the standard port for Angular applications. So I'm going to browse to that, and let me bring Chrome over to my main monitor, and as you can see, the application works. Now let's try running the unit tests. So back to Visual Studio Code, I'm going to run the test npm script. And we have 3 passing tests. Great. Now let's add a second Angular application so we can see how multiple applications are set up using NX. So I'll go to my NX console and then generate, and I'll select Angular application like I did before, and we'll call this application calendar. We're going to use the same style, and everything else is the default. And as you can see here, it's going to create the calendar app under apps /calendar and calendar E2E. So that looks good. We'll just hit run, and it's going to ask us about routing. This time, we'll say no. Okay, a bunch of files created, and our workspace now has several modifications. So let's take a look at that angular.json, and you can see there has been another node added, a new project called calendar. And we'll look at the folder structure, collapse everything, and then we expand apps, and now we have a calendar and calendar E2E. And it's set up the exact same way as our to-do apps are. Right, so this is one of the benefits. You know exactly where everything should be. There's no deviation in naming conventions or folder structures, so it really helps you understand the code, I think, quicker. You spend less time hunting around for things. Okay, so let's run the unit tests to see what happens when we run the test command. So I'm going to click test and then hit the run button. So it just ran the tests for to-dos app. Oh, and now it's running the test for a calendar. So it takes every application in the workspace and it's going to run the unit tests. Now, hopefully you're seeing where the benefit of the affected test command comes in. If you have 50 applications and you're only working in one, you may not necessarily need to run tests in all 50 applications, which may take a while. That's why you run the affected test, to run only the tests that are affected by your code change, and NX is smart enough to figure that out, which is a huge time saver, and it reduces the risk of you introducing some change that will break some other application. What if we just wanted to run the tests for the calendar app? That's easy enough. In a terminal window, just type in npm run test and then the name of the app. And this will run the tests only for the calendar app. Similarly, if you want to do serve the app, you can type npm run start and the name of the app. So let's start up the calendar app. Let it compile. Okay, it's listening on 4200, and I'll bring over my Chrome window, and you can see it says welcome to calendar. Let's look at the dependency graph for our workspace. So back in Visual Studio Code, if I run the dep graph npm script, it will open up the dependency graph in Chrome, bring it over to my primary monitor, and as you can see, we have our two applications, and it says there's an implicit dependency on the end-to-end tests. Right now there's not much to look at, but as your applications grow, this dependency graph will grow, and it becomes a really handy tool to visualize the structure of your application. Alright, that concludes this video, introducing NX, creating an Angular application. If you liked the video, please hit like, and even better, please subscribe to my channel. It'll definitely motivate me to create more videos like this. Thank you.